Some people are born with the chip of the absurd activated. You look at the person, and you already feel that trouble ahead energy. That's exactly how I felt when I first met my new neighbor. She hadn't even finished moving in, and she was already on the other side of the fence monitoring the street as if she were the sheriff of a condominium. You know that guy who carries around a notebook as if he's going to impose a fine on other people's souls? Yeah, and since every bad soap opera needs a pet to be the pivot of the chaos, my cat entered the scene. Yes, the chaos started with a cat. A cat who, let's face it, has more sense than a lot of adults out there. Garfield, his name. Not the one in the lasagna, but mine, red-haired, lazy, loves to take naps in the most random places. One day he decided to climb the neighbor's wall to enjoy the afternoon sun. A wall, in fact, that separates our backyards like any standard wall. A piece of concrete that, until that moment, had never been the protagonist of anything in his life. But all it took was for Garfield to stroll up to it, like any cat would, for it to become a B-series crime scene. The woman appeared at the door as if she had witnessed a mass murder. She was shouting with her arms up, pointing at the cat as if it were a demon incarnate. And I, on the other side, was trying to work out whether she thought the cat was a spy drone or a nuclear threat. She screamed that he was invading private property, that he was violating association rules, that she had the right to security and peace. Peace? Honey, anyone who loses their composure over a cat on the wall needs meditation, not legislation. At first, I confess, I tried to talk to her. Really, I tried. I told her that cats are curious animals, that they roam wherever they want, that it wasn't destroying anything, it was just sunbathing like any being that values vitamin D. But she was at a level of indignation. But she was so indignant that she wouldn't calm down, even if the Pope blessed the cat. What's worse is that she started spreading stories in the neighborhood group saying that the cat could transmit diseases, that it could get into her house, that it could even bite someone. People bite? A 12-year-old cat without a tooth in its mouth? I would have let it go. You know, we learn to get around bad neighbors, to ignore them, to smile falsely when they cross the street. But then came the moment that made me lose it. On an ordinary afternoon, I was sitting on the balcony, drinking my coffee, when I heard an electric crack. I thought it might be a wire, some kind of power cut. But then I saw her standing in the yard, with a bloody teaser in her hand, pointing at the wall. The wall, where, of course, Garfield was lying, looking like he didn't give a damn about the nervous breakdown she was having. She tried to shock my cat. I swear to all that is holy. She tried to electrocute my cat, and at that moment, something in me clicked. That feeling that everyone who has ever worked in the police knows. That tension that rises when someone crosses a line they shouldn't have. Because yes, my dear, you can be crazy. You can be inconvenient. You can even think you own the neighborhood. But trying to hurt my pet? Then there's no turning back. What she didn't know was that the quiet old man next door, the guy sweeping the sidewalk and smiling with the hose in his hand, was a retired deputy. Me, himself. And, I have a certain gift for dealing with people like that. Not with violence, of course. We leave that for the movies. But with strategy, with calm, with the same coolness I've learned to cultivate in years and years of dealing with people who are liars, manipulators, and worse, with a distorted sense of justice. Because these people love a rule, as long as the rule only works for them. Little did she know that the moment she raised that teaser, like Thor wielding a hammer, she had declared war on the wrong person. Not that I was going to start firing lawsuits immediately, yet, but I knew this woman needed to be taught a lesson, not just for her audacity, but because she thought she could do whatever she wanted, with whomever she wanted, without any consequences. And if there's one thing I've learned in life, it's that some people only learn when they get a shock. Metaphorical, of course, but accurate. The day after the horror show of the woman wielding a teaser, I confess that I spent a good few hours standing in the kitchen, staring at my coffee mug as if it were going to provide me with answers. Because, you see, some people freak out. That's normal. There are those who shout, those who complain, those who make an issue of things. But going out into the yard trying to fry an elderly cat with a teaser because it walked into a wall, that requires a special kind of insanity, seasoned with cruelty and ignorance in industrial doses. The most ironic thing of all was that she still felt entitled. She firmly believed she was defending her property, her honor, her morals, whatever fantasy she was living in. The wall, according to her, was a sacred extension of her home, and any outside touch was an affront worthy of punishment, preferably electric. The most bizarre thing was that she didn't hide. It wasn't a sneak attack. It was in the open, in a shout, in front of anyone passing in the street. She pointed that device at Garfield as if he were a dangerous intruder, and if it hadn't been for my quick intervention, he might have had his ass on fire right now. And there begins the dilemma. What to do with someone like that? Ignoring was no longer an option. Report it to the HOA. Oh, please. The same association that rules and rules over the color of the mailbox, but turns a blind eye when one of its protégés decides to play at animal extermination. They're the kind of people who love a regulation, as long as they can interpret it according to the convenience of the day. So I did what I had learned to do over years of service. I watched. I kept quiet. I collected my emotions, pushed my indignation into a corner, and turned on silent hunter mode. No direct fight, no scandal. I wanted to understand what motivated that woman. I wanted to know if the problem was just with my cat, or if it was with the whole universe. And of course, if she kept any more electric toys in the cupboard. Over the next few days, my house became a kind of emotional bunker. Garfield was forbidden to leave the house, which he obviously hated. He spent his mornings meowing at the window as if I were the jailer for a crime he hadn't even committed. But I needed to keep him safe, and I needed time. Because something told me that this woman wasn't just unbalanced, she was methodical. And methodical people always make the mistake of repeating their own steps. That's when I started to notice the patterns. She left every morning at exactly 8:27. She always wore the same yoga clothes, as if she were going to a spiritual class. But her sour face showed that her main meditation was watching the neighbor's garbage. He walked with hard steps, like he was marching against the world, and from time to time he stopped to take photos of small infractions. A flower out of place, a poorly painted fence, a car parked a little crooked. It was as if she had been sent to Earth with the divine mission of saving the neighborhood from spontaneity. On the third morning of observation, I saw her bend down near my wall and put something under the fence. I went outside immediately, with the excuse that I was watering the plants, and when I got there, I found pieces of aluminum foil and a strange little device with a flashing red light, an animal repellent, the kind that emit a high-pitched sound that humans can't hear, but that drive animals crazy. She was trying to scare my cat away with sound torture. And once again, on this side of the wall, I felt my blood begin to boil. But still, it wasn't time to act. I needed her to dig her own hole. And she, like any good fan of her own sense of justice, didn't let me down. 2 days later, she knocked on my door with a black briefcase under her arm. She said it was an official visit from the committee, and that she needed to discuss the presence of my animal in common areas of the neighborhood. Common areas, she said, included roofs, walls, shadows, and any inch of land she could claim as her own. She began to list a series of absurdities with the seriousness of someone who was reciting the Constitution. She talked about feline coexistence protocols, cited an HOA clause that clearly didn't apply, and ended by saying that if the problem persisted, she would take legal action. All this with a plastic smile on her face and her eyes shining with pleasure at her own theatrics. I let her talk. I nodded. I thanked her for her visit, and when she turned away, I went into the house, sat down on the sofa, and began to put together my plan. Not a violent plan, but a plan that required precision, patience, and a good dose of irony. Because now, it wasn't just about Garfield. It was about this woman having the audacity to try to take over the entire neighborhood, to use the flag of order as an excuse to impose her madness, and to think she was above all consequences. Most importantly, she needed to understand that not every neighbor is a frightened little lamb. There was something almost poetic about the idea of turning the tables on someone who thinks they're unbeatable. That woman, so obsessed with dictating the rules and feeling like she owns everything, hardly realized that she was about to trip over her own arrogance. The problem with people who live to control others is that, sooner or later, they bump into someone who has lived long enough to know exactly how to deal with them. Someone like me. Retired? Yes. Quiet, perhaps. But silly? Never. Years of dealing with criminals, with people who lie to you looking you in the eye, with scoundrels who are much more dangerous than a crazy person with a tight bun and a cicada voice on loop, have given me a razor-sharp patience. The kind that doesn't shout, cry, or talk. The kind who observes, takes notes, and waits for the right moment to pull the rug out from under her. It was in this spirit that I began to assemble my arsenal. Nothing illegal, of course. Just enough to show her that shouting isn't always stronger than silence. I started with the neighbors. I discovered that, in addition to Garfield, she had already picked on Mr. Jenkins's dog, the birds in Carol's yard, and, amazingly, even the hose that the couple down the street used to water their garden. Very noisy, according to her, because apparently the sound of water coming out of a hose is the new villain of the 21st century. Each of these neighbors had their own history with her. Little tiffs, intrigues, formal complaints that never came to anything because, of course, the crazy lady was part of the HOA Rules Committee, and then everything fell into place. She dictated the rules, applied the penalties, handled the forms. She was the guardian of order, and also the very mess disguised as morality. With these accounts, I put together a small dossier. Photos, prints, notes, even videos. Because, you see, I had cameras at home. I installed them for safety, but now they served an even sweeter purpose. One of the recordings clearly showed the moment she tried to use the teaser on Garfield. Another showed her putting the high-pitched stereo under the fence. And another, even better, showed her taking pictures of her neighbor's garden while muttering something about disrespectful landscaping. This coming from someone who has been hanging a plastic crow from the front tree since Halloween 2019. But then came the masterstroke. One afternoon, while I was pretending to look after my plants, I noticed that she was once again wandering around the yard. This time, she was holding a clipboard and taking measurements of the wall. Measurements. I laughed inside. Seriously, she was measuring the wall, probably looking for a loophole to demand demolition for height violations. It was at that moment that I decided to strike back, not with violence, I repeat, but with what she feared most, real formality. I contacted an old friend, a lawyer who specializes in neighborhood law. I explained what had happened, showed him the videos, and shared the accounts of the other residents. He was so shocked that he asked me twice whether I was talking about a real person or a badly written satire. The next day, he filed a formal notice for attempted assault on a domestic animal, invasion of privacy, and, the icing on the cake, abuse of power in a community instance. This was all signed, stamped, and sent with a copy to the HOA and the local police station. And then, silence. For 3 days. No sightings, no complaints, no cries. The creature had disappeared. It almost seemed like a miracle. But I knew it was only the beginning of the storm, because people like it don't disappear. They retreat to arm themselves again. And that's exactly what happened. On the 4th day, I heard the sound of hard footsteps on the sidewalk. The doorbell rang with that insistent tone, like someone who wants to announce the arrival of a tsunami of resentment. I opened the door, and there she was, the woman with the teaser, the tight bun, the glint of anger in her eyes, Only this time, no fake smiles, no theatrics, just pure hatred. She said she had received the notification, that it was all exaggerated, that I was defaming an exemplary citizen and trying to turn the neighbors against her. And then came the part that made me almost laugh. She threatened to sue me. She said she would not remain silent in the face of such injustice, as if she was the good girl in the soap opera and I was the villain who stole Grandma's recipe. Seriously, all that was missing was the violin playing in the background. I let her talk. I let her spill her poison, spit out every drop of her wounded pride, and when she'd finished, breathing heavily and her hands shaking with hatred, all she said was, "You tried to electrocute a cat. There's video, there are witnesses, and now there's a lawsuit." She froze for a second, the kind of silence that reveals that, for the first time, she didn't have a ready-made argument. She didn't have a printed piece of paper with the rules. There was no way to turn the tables. And I, standing there, looking straight into her eyes, saw the dread begin to form. And that's when I knew. The woman felt it. For the first time, she realized that she wasn't untouchable. And nothing in the world scares someone like her more than the idea of not being in control. She disappeared for a few days after that conversation. And when I say disappeared, I mean didn't even show up to watch other people's garbage. She didn't prowl the block. She didn't patrol with her clipboard. She didn't yell at the neighbors about hydrangeas that didn't match the community's color palette. Nothing. The world became a little quieter. And I confess that this gave me an uncomfortable peace, because that kind of silence isn't calm. It's a harbinger of return. And with her, every return was dramatic. Meanwhile, the dust in the neighborhood began to settle. The neighbors, who used to whisper for fear of reprisals, started showing up at my door. First, Mr. Jenkins, with his dog limping because someone threw something suspicious in his yard weeks ago. Guess who? Then came Mrs. Carroll, bringing photos of her wife scouring her chicken coop as if she were a health inspector sent by God. Even the couple with the hose brought a recording in which she threatened to fine them for excessive use of water during the dry season. This was in the middle of winter, with the ground soaked with rain. I gathered all this material. I sent it to my lawyer, who smiled like someone receiving an early birthday present. He said he had never seen such a dysfunctional neighborhood, dominated by such a small human being with such a gigantic ego. And that's when everything came to a head. The HOA, under pressure from the residents themselves, was forced to call a meeting. And when I say call, I mean forced out of connivance after years of covering up absurdities. The meeting took place on a Saturday morning in the community hall, which smells of wet carpet and stale machine coffee. It was packed. Even those who usually hide behind curtains showed up, excited at the possibility of witnessing the fall of an empire made of laminated paper and resentment. The woman arrived with her usual stern face, as if nothing had happened, wearing her beige sweater of moral victory, and the expression of someone about to give a biblical sermon. He tried to speak first, of course. He claimed persecution, injustice, a conspiracy orchestrated by neighbors who don't respect order. He said he was the victim of a personal attack, that the video recordings were edited, and that the cat was violent and wild. Yes, you read that right. Wild. Garfield, the cat who sleeps 18 hours a day and needs help to get on the sofa. There was restrained laughter, some very open ones. Then it was my turn. I didn't have to raise my voice. I just asked the person in charge of the projector to play the videos. One by one, the teaser, the repellent, the photos of the wall measurements, the threats to the neighbors, the bizarre notes she made on everyone's lawn, all there, projected on a big screen, in front of an audience that alternated between indignation, shock, and sheer delight. She, on the other side, was sweating. She tried to interrupt, rolled her eyes, said it was all a setup, but no one was listening anymore. The president of the HOA who until then had maintained a more neutral stance than Switzerland in a war championship, stood up and, with the trembling voice of someone who feels the wall cracking behind their back, announced that an internal investigation would be opened. Until that moment, it seemed that she still believed she would get out of there with her pose intact. But all it took was for a neighbor to stand up and read aloud the reports of abuse of authority she had suffered from that woman for the theater to collapse. And from then on, it was downhill. A few days later, I received confirmation that she had been officially removed from her position on the committee, without prior warning, without the right to defend herself, ironically, as she herself used to do to anyone who hung up the crooked hose. And the best part? A new regulation, proposed by the residents themselves, was approved. No member of the HOA could apply rules without collective consultation. The reign of the concrete queen was over, and like every villain who loses his throne, she tried to breathe a last sigh of glory. A post in the neighborhood group, crying persecution, saying that we were all ungrateful, that she only wanted the good of the neighborhood. It ended with a, "You'll miss me." She got 2 likes. One was from herself, the other was from a fake profile clearly created on the same day. After that, we never saw her walking around with her clipboard. They say she's put her house up for sale. They say she plans to move to a community where the rules really work. Maybe a monastery, maybe Mars. Honestly, it doesn't matter. The important thing is that, on that side of the wall, the sun is shining again. Garfield once again stretched out like a king atop his concrete kingdom. And what about me? I've regained my backyard, my silence, and the certainty that sometimes the world still turns the right way. And every time I look at the wall, I remember that that little piece of concrete was once a battlefield. But today, it's just the throne of an old cat and a neighbor who won't forget. And don't forget to leave your like and comment below.